a merchant named Thomas Whitmore dips his quill into an inkwell. The year is 1784, and the candlelight flickers across his mahogany desk, casting dancing shadows on the plaster walls. Outside, the city settles into evening. Cart wheels have stopped their rumbling, shopkeepers have shuttered their windows, and the lamplighter makes his slow rounds down the cobbled street. Thomas writes to his brother in New York, careful script flowing across the cream-colored paper. The paper itself has traveled far to reach this desk, pressed from linen rags in a mill outside the city, watermarked with a crown that you can see when held to the light. His hand moves steadily, the scratch of the nib the only sound besides the soft breathing of the fire in the grate. "My dear brother Samuel," he begins, and the words hold the weight of an ocean between them. He writes of the autumn harvest, of mother's health improving, of the price of tea and timber. Simple things, but precious across such distance. When letters take months to arrive, every word must count. Yet Thomas writes as though his brother sits across from him, sharing the warmth of this room. He folds the letter carefully, thirds meeting precisely. From a stick of red sealing wax, he melts a small pool onto the fold, pressing his signet ring into it. A simple W that will travel 3,000 miles. The letter, now sealed with its secret words hidden inside, weighs almost nothing in his hand. But it carries everything. Morning comes slowly to London. The letter rests on Thomas's desk overnight, waiting. When dawn breaks gray and soft through the fog, a maidservant enters to tend the fire, and Thomas gives her the letter with a coin. "For the post," he says, and she nods, tucking both into her apron pocket. The General Post Office stands on Lombard Street, an imposing building of Portland stone that has processed the hopes and business of an empire for decades. By 7 in the morning, its great wooden doors are already open, and people queue in the entrance hall. The air smells of damp wool and sealing wax, of ink and old paper, of the thousands upon thousands of letters that have passed through these doors. Our letter makes its journey in the maidservant's careful hands, past the coffee houses where merchants are just beginning their morning business, past the flower sellers setting up their baskets, past the crossing sweepers clearing the night's debris from the cobblestones. London is waking, stretching, coming alive in degrees. First the bakers with their warm bread, then the milk sellers with their calls, then the great flow of humanity that fills these streets like water finding channels. At the post office window, she hands over the letter and the coins for postage. The clerk, a thin man with spectacles perched on his nose, weighs it on a small brass scale. "New York," he reads from the address and nods. 3 shillings 6 pence. The coins clink into his drawer, and he applies an inked stamp to the letter's face. A postmark showing the date and London in an arc. The letter disappears into a canvas sack with dozens of others, all bound for distant places, all carrying their small cargoes of human connection across the miles. Behind the public rooms of the post office lies a world most Londoners never see. The sorting office, where the empire's correspondence is organized and directed like water through sluices. Here, in a long room lit by windows on both sides, clerks sit at high desks, sorting letters with practiced efficiency. Our letter tumbles from its sack onto a long wooden table. Around it land letters addressed to Edinburgh, to Dublin, to Boston, to Calcutta. Letters in every hand. The careful copperplate of professional scribes, the sprawling script of barely literate farmers, the tiny economical writing of those who cannot afford to waste paper. Each one a story, each one a connection stretching across distance. A senior clerk named Mr. Pemberton picks up our letter. He has worked in this office for 23 years, and his fingers know the weight and feel of correspondence the way a wine merchant knows vintages. "New York," he reads, and places it in a specific pigeonhole on a wall fitted with hundreds of such compartments. This section is for North American colonies. Though of course they are colonies no longer, the sorting system still bears the old labels, painted in neat black letters years ago. The room hums with quiet industry. No one speaks loudly here. It would disturb the concentration required to send each letter to its proper destination. The scratch of pens, the rustle of paper, the soft thump of letters landing in compartments. These are the rhythms of this place. Outside, London roars and clatters, but here, in this sorting office, the work proceeds with the steady patience of a craft. Every few hours, a clerk empties the North American compartments into a leather pouch, which is then labeled and sealed. Our letter nestles against others bound for Philadelphia, New York, Charlestown. Together, they wait for the next stage of their journey, the mail coach that will carry them to the coast. The Royal Mail Coach departs London at 8 o'clock in the evening, precise as clockwork. It is a magnificent vehicle, lacquered black and scarlet, with the royal cipher painted in gold on its doors. For horses stand in their traces, their breath steaming in the cool evening air. They are strong beasts, well-fed and well-shod, for they will run through the night. The mail coach is both a symbol and a practical marvel. It carries not only letters but also the authority of the crown, the connection between London and every corner of the kingdom. The driver sits high on his box, wrapped in a many-caped greatcoat, his face weathered by years of wind and weather. Beside him sits the guard, a blunderbuss across his knees, for mail coaches carry valuables, and the roads are not always safe. Our letter, in its leather pouch, is locked in the mail compartment, a specially designed box built into the rear of the coach. For passengers sit inside the coach itself, squeezed together on facing bench seats, their knees nearly touching. But they are privileged to travel by Royal Mail, the fastest public transport in England, and they endure the discomfort for the sake of speed. The guard blows his horn, a long, clear note that echoes down the street. The driver releases the brake, speaks to his horses, and the coach lurches into motion. The wheels rumble over cobblestones, the springs creak and sway, and London begins to slide past the windows. They travel through Cheapside and out along the Whitechapel Road, leaving the dense heart of the city behind. The buildings grow smaller, more scattered. Fields appear between the houses. The great city releases them into the countryside, and the horses settle into their rhythm, the steady, ground-eating trot that will carry them through the darkness toward the coast. The road unrolls beneath the wheels in darkness. The coach lamps swing with the motion, casting moving pools of yellow light on the road ahead, catching the white-painted milestones that mark their progress. 10 miles from London. 15. 20. Inside the mail compartment, our letter rests in darkness, surrounded by the gentle creak of leather and wood, the rhythmic thunder of hooves, the jingle of harness. If a letter could sense its journey, it would feel the constant motion, the swaying and bouncing as the coach navigates ruts and stones, the changes in speed as the driver judges his horse's strength and the road's condition. The countryside at night is not silent. Owls call from the trees that line the road. In the distance, a dog barks at a farm. The wind moves through autumn leaves with a sound like waves. The coach passes through sleeping villages, a brief stretch of buildings, dark windows, perhaps a single light at an inn where travelers sit by the fire, and then out again into open country. At each coaching inn, the stops are brief and practiced. Fresh horses are brought out, already in their harness, while the tired team is led away steaming into the stable. The passengers descend, stiff-legged, to use the facilities and perhaps swallow a hurried cup of tea. But the mail waits for no one. 10 minutes, perhaps 15, and the guard's horn sounds again. Those who have not returned are left behind. The mail coach waits for nothing. Our letter knows nothing of this urgency. It simply exists, pressed between other letters, in darkness, moving ever eastward toward the sea. The words written by candlelight in London are traveling now through the deep night of rural England, carried by the strength of horses and the skill of men who know every mile of this road, every dangerous turn, every place where highwaymen might wait in the shadows. But tonight, the road is quiet. The moon rises late, silver and 3/4 full, and by its light the landscape becomes visible. The gentle rolling hills of Kent, the dark shapes of oaks and elms, the occasional glint of water in a stream. The mail coach runs on through the beauty of it all, its passengers dozing against each other's shoulders, its cargo of letters dreaming their paper dreams of distant destinations. The sky begins to pale in the east as the mail coach descends the long hill toward Dover. The horses, their sixth team of the night, lean back against their britching straps, letting the weight of the coach push them gently downward. Below, the sea appears, a vast expanse of gray-green water that stretches to the horizon, where it meets the lightning sky in a line as straight as a rule. Dover has been a gateway to the continent for centuries, and even at this early hour, the port is alive with activity. Fishermen prepare their boats for the day's work, calling to each other in the broad accent of Kent. Gulls will overhead, their cries sharp in the salt air. The smell of the sea, brine and fish and tar and rope, replaces the earthy sense of the countryside. The mail coach rattles down the cobbled streets toward the posting house, its wheels echoing between the whitewashed buildings. Here, finally, after a night of travel, the coach comes to rest. The horses stand with drooping heads, their sides heaving, steam rising from their backs in the cool morning air. They have done their work faithfully, and now they will be led to warm stables, rubbed down, fed and watered, and allowed to rest. The guard unlocks the mail compartment with a large brass key that hangs on a chain around his neck. The leather pouches are removed and carried into the posting house, where another sorting will take place. Our letter, still in its pouch with its companions bound for New York, is set aside on a special table marked Overseas Post. Through the window, the sea is visible, and on it, riding at anchor in the harbor, several ships wait. One of them, a packet ship named the Mercury, will carry our letter across the Atlantic. But first, there is breakfast to be had, and the post clerk must complete his records, and the ships must wait for the tide. Dover, in 1784, is a town that lives by the rhythm of the tides and the comings and goings of ships. The harbor is a forest of masts, fishing boats, merchant vessels, naval ships, and the regular packet boats that carry mail and passengers between England and the world beyond. The posting house where our letter now rests is a busy establishment. Travelers wait in the common room, sitting on wooden settles near a large fireplace where a coal fire burns even in autumn. They are a mixed group, merchants traveling on business, a naval officer returning to his ship, a mother and daughter bound for France, their faces pale with apprehension at the journey ahead. The post clerk is a methodical man named Mr. Harris. He has managed the overseas post for 12 years, and he knows which ships sail when, which captains are reliable, which routes are fastest. He opens the pouch containing our letter and spreads the contents on his desk. Each letter is examined, its destination noted in his ledger. New York, Philadelphia, Boston, New York, Charlestown, New York again. The young American nation draws much correspondence. He separates them by destination, creating neat stacks. Our letter goes into the New York pile, which is the largest. When he has finished, he counts them, 47 letters for New York on this delivery. Some are thick with multiple pages, sealed with elaborate wax seals bearing family crests. Others, like ours, are simple single-sheet letters from ordinary people maintaining their precious connections across the ocean. Outside, the morning has fully arrived. The sun is clear of the horizon now, turning the water gold and blue. Boats move in and out of the harbor, their sails catching the light. Somewhere out there, across 3,000 miles of ocean, New York waits, a growing city on the edge of a new nation, where our letter's journey will eventually end. But between here and there lies the greatest challenge. The Atlantic Ocean, changeable and vast, which respects neither kings nor letters, and which must be crossed in wooden ships driven by wind and current and the skill of sailors. The Mercury is a packet ship, a vessel built specifically for the mail service, designed for speed and reliability rather than cargo capacity. She is a three-masted ship of about 300 tons, her hull painted black with a single white stripe, her name picked out in gold letters on her stern. She has made the Atlantic crossing 17 times, and her captain, James Rothwell, knows every mood of that great ocean. At midday, when the tide begins to turn, the mail is brought aboard. A small boat ferries the leather pouches from the quay to the shipside, where sailors haul them up and over the rail. Our letter, still nestled with its companions in the New York pouch, is carried down a steep ladder into the ship's interior. The ship smells of tar and salt water, of damp wood and canvas, of the cargo stored below. Barrels of English china, crates of manufactured goods, bolts of cloth. But the mail is kept separate, in a special compartment near the captain's cabin. This is the driest part of the ship, the most protected. The mail must arrive safe and legible, even if everything else is lost. The mail room is small, barely 6 feet square, with stout walls and a heavy door that can be locked. Shelves line the walls, and here the pouches are stored, lashed in place with rope so they cannot shift when the ship rolls. Our letters pouch is placed on the middle shelf and secured. In the dim light that filters through a small, thick-glassed porthole, the leather gleams dully. Above deck, preparations for departure continue. The captain checks his charts and instruments. The first mate counts the crew and ensures all are aboard and sober. Barrels of fresh water and salted meat are secured in the hold. The sails are inspected for tears or weakness. A ship preparing for an ocean voyage is a marvel of organization. Every detail attended to, for at sea there are no second chances. The tide reaches its height in early afternoon. The wind is from the southwest, fresh and steady, perfect for a ship departing Dover and heading out into the channel. Captain Rothwell gives the order to make ready. The anchor is raised, dripping with seaweed and harbor mud, hauled up by the capstan with sailors pushing the bars around and around, singing a work song to keep their rhythm. "Heave away, cheerily, men," calls the first mate, and the anchor breaks free from the bottom. The ship, released from the earth's hold, begins to drift with the tide. Sailors swarm into the rigging, nimble as spiders, loosening the gaskets that hold the sails furled to the yards. The orders come in sequence, each one precisely timed. Loose the topsails. The canvas drops, great sheets of it, heavy as iron when dry, heavier still when wet. Sheet home. The ropes are hauled tight, the sails take shape. Hoist away. The yards are raised to their proper positions. And then the miracle. The wind fills the sails, and they curve into perfect bellies of white canvas, and the ship begins to move. The Mercury glides out of Dover harbor like a swan entering water. The land falls away on either side. The white cliffs for which Dover is famous, chalk faces watching ships come and go as they have for millennia. Passengers line the rail watching England recede. Some wave to figures on shore, though at this distance no one can tell if their gestures are seen. Below, in the mailroom, our letter knows nothing of this moment. But it has left England now. The motion of the ship is different from the motion of the coach. A long, slow rise and fall as the vessel meets the first swells of open water. The pouch sways gently in its lashings, a rhythm that will continue for weeks. The sea spreads before the ship, vast and trackless. Somewhere beyond the horizon lies Ireland, and beyond that, the open Atlantic, and beyond that, 3,000 miles away, the coast of America. The Mercury points her bow westward and begins the journey that thousands of ships have made and thousands more will make, carrying people and goods and letters and dreams across the great divide of ocean. Evening finds the Mercury well out into the English Channel, with the coast of England now just a dark line on the eastern horizon. The ship has settled into her rhythm, rising and falling over the swells, the wind steady in her sails. On deck, the watch changes, for men going below to rest, for men coming up to take their places. The sea at twilight is beautiful in a way that can seem almost otherworldly. The water darkens from blue to purple to black, while the western sky holds the last light, orange fading to pink, fading to deep blue. The ship's wake trails behind her, phosphorescent in the gathering darkness, glowing with the tiny sea creatures disturbed by her passage. Captain Rothwell takes his evening reading of the ship's position with his sextant, measuring the angle of the last visible stars against the horizon. He notes the readings in his log, along with the wind direction, the ship speed, the state of the weather. These details, recorded faithfully each day, will trace the Mercury's path across the Atlantic, a line drawn across blank ocean, connecting two worlds. Below deck, the crew settles into their quarters. The FOCSLE, where the common sailors sleep, is a cramped space filled with hammocks slung so close together that the men nearly touch when they swing. The air is thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, damp wool, tobacco smoke. But the sailors are used to this. It is their home for the duration of the voyage, and they have made it comfortable in small ways. A few personal items tucked into corners, a sketch of a sweetheart pinned to a beam, a flask of rum shared among messmates. In the officers' quarters aft, conditions are better but still austere. The first mate writes a letter to his wife, though it will be weeks before he can post it. He writes by the light of a lantern swinging on its hook, the flame dancing with the ship's motion. He tells her of the departure, the weather, his hopes for a swift passage. Even he, a man who crosses oceans for his living, feels the pull of home. And deep in the ship, in the mail room, our letter rests in darkness. Around it, the ship creaks and groans, the sound of wood working against wood, of ropes stretching, of the sea pressing against the hull. These are the ship's voices, the constant song of a vessel at sea. Our letter will hear this music for weeks, until at last it reaches the far shore. Days at sea develop their own rhythm, as regular as the tides. The Mercury is a world unto herself, carrying her small population across the vast emptiness of the ocean. 52 souls are aboard, 33 crew members, Captain Rothwell, his 2 mates, and 16 passengers of various ages and stations. The passengers occupy the limited cabin space below the main deck. The accommodations are small, some cabins barely large enough for a narrow bunk and a sea chest, but they are at least private. The merchant Mr. Blackwood and his wife have paid for one of the better cabins, with an actual window, heavily shuttered in rough weather, and room for 2 chairs. The Reverend Thompson, traveling to take up a position in New York, has a tiny cabin to himself, where he reads his Bible by candlelight and prays for a safe crossing. The poorer passengers share larger cabins with bunks stacked 3 high. A young couple, the Hendersons, newly married and seeking their fortune in America, lie in their narrow bunk and whisper to each other, planning their new life. Below them, a widow named Mrs. Patterson cradles a small wooden box containing her husband's letters. He died 3 months ago, and she is going to live with her sister in Philadelphia, carrying all that remains of her married life in that box and one small trunk. Each morning at 8 bells, the ship's bell rings for breakfast. The passengers gather in the common area, a space barely 20 feet square, where long tables are set. The food is simple: ship's biscuit, hard as stones and often inhabited by weevils, salt pork or beef, dried peas boiled into a thick porridge, cheese if they are lucky, coffee or tea heavily sugared. It is monotonous fare, but it sustains life, and after a few days at sea, even this begins to taste good. The sailors eat separately in the FOCSLE, their rations measured out precisely. They are allowed a gallon of beer per day, which usually runs out within the first week, or a half pint of rum mixed with water to make grog. Their meals are the same as the passengers but without the coffee or tea. Those luxuries are reserved for paying customers and officers. Between meals, time passes slowly. Passengers read if they have books. They play cards or backgammon. They walk the deck when weather permits, pacing back and forth along the limited space, breathing the fresh air, watching the endless sea. Some grow seasick and spend days in their bunks miserable. Others adapt quickly and come to find a strange peace in the voyage. Below the passenger quarters, below the waterline, lies the hold, the deepest part of the ship, where cargo is stored and where the mail room is located. It is a world of darkness and strange sounds, of water sloshing against the hull just inches away, of the ship's timbers groaning under the stress of the voyage. The hold is accessed by a steep ladder, almost vertical, that descends through a hatch from the lower deck. Few passengers ever venture down here. It is the realm of the crew, specifically the boatswain and his mates who manage the cargo. The air is thick and damp, smelling of bilge water and the various goods stored here. Crates and barrels are lashed in place with heavy rope, secured so tightly they cannot shift even in the worst weather. A cargo that shifts can capsize a ship, so this work is done with extreme care. Between the secured cargo are narrow passageways where a man must turn sideways to pass. A lantern carried here casts wild shadows, making the familiar shapes of boxes and barrels look strange and ominous. The mail room is set into the stern section of the hold, built against the ship's frames like a small fortress. Its walls are double thickness, and the door is fitted with a heavy lock. Once a day, the purser, the officer responsible for the mail, descends with a lantern to check the mailroom. He unlocks the door, swings it open, and inspects the interior. The leather pouches hang in their places, swaying with the ship's motion. The purser runs his hands over them, checking for dampness. The mail room is dry as it should be, but vigilance is necessary. A leak, a breach in the hull, and the mail could be destroyed. He notes in his log, Day 4 at sea. Mail secure. No dampness. Then he locks the door again and climbs back to the upper decks. Our letter rests in its pouch, in darkness almost complete, feeling the endless motion of the ship. The journey is not comfortable, but the letter is safe, protected by the care of men who understand their duty. In the pitch blackness of the hold, surrounded by the creaking of timbers and the distant sound of water against the hull, the letter waits, patient as only an inanimate object can be. On the 7th day out from Dover, the glass begins to fall. Captain Rothwell taps the barometer in his cabin and frowns. The needle has dropped significantly in the past 6 hours, a sign of weather to come. He goes on deck and scans the horizon. To the northwest, clouds are building, dark and towering, their tops anvil-shaped against the blue sky. Mr. Patterson, he calls to the first mate. Prepare the ship for heavy weather. Reef the topsails and get the passengers below. We'll have a blow before nightfall. The crew moves into action with practiced efficiency. Sailors climb the rigging to reef the sails, to reduce their area by tying up sections of canvas. The ship slows but becomes more manageable. On deck, everything loose is lashed down. The passengers, alarmed by the sudden activity, are ushered to their cabins and told to remain there. The storm arrives as the sun sets, but there is no sunset to see, only a darkening of the already gray sky. The wind increases, shifting direction, coming now from the northwest in gusts that make the ship heel over. Rain begins light at first, then heavy, then torrential. The sea, which has been relatively calm, begins to build into waves, 6 feet, 8 feet, 10 feet, each one lifting the Mercury's bow and then passing under her, dropping her into the trough behind. Captain Rothwell remains on deck, though he is soaked to the skin within minutes. This is his ship, and he will see her through. The helmsman fights the wheel, which kicks and bucks in his hands as the waves try to push the ship off course. 2 more sailors are sent to help him, 3 sets of hands on the wheel, all of them straining. Below, the passengers cling to their bunks as the ship pitches and rolls. Mrs. Blackwood is sick into a bucket. The Reverend Thompson prays aloud, his voice barely audible over the storm. Young Mrs. Henderson holds her husband's hand and tries not to cry. The ship climbs each wave with a shuddering strain, pauses at the crest, and then plunges down the far side, hitting the bottom of the trough with a crash that sounds like the ship has struck rock. In the hold, water sloshes back and forth, though the pumps are keeping ahead of it. The mail room door remains locked, and inside, our letter shifts slightly in its pouch as the ship rolls. The storm is frightening to those who experience it, but the Mercury is a strong ship, built for this. She bends but does not break, rises when pushed down, endures what the ocean throws at her. By morning, the storm has passed. The wind still blows fresh, but the rain has stopped, and the waves, though still large, are no longer threatening. The sun breaks through the clouds in shafts of light that illuminate patches of the sea, turning the gray water to silver. On deck, the crew assesses the damage. A section of rail has been carried away. One of the ship's boats has been stove in and will need repair. Several sails have torn and must be mended. But the Mercury herself is sound, and no one has been seriously injured. Captain Rothwell allows himself a moment of relief before turning his attention to getting the ship back to optimal sailing condition. The sailmaker, an old sailor named Jenkins who has been at sea for 40 years, spreads out the torn canvas on the deck. His needle, a curved steel spike as thick as a finger, pierces the heavy fabric, and his hands, gnarled by arthritis but still nimble, pull the waxed thread through. Other sailors join him, and together they work in the sunshine, their needles flashing, gradually closing the rents in the sails. The passengers emerge from below, pale and shaken but relieved to be alive. The deck is washed clean by the storm, and the air smells fresh and salt-sharp. Mrs. Blackwood takes her first full breath in 12 hours. The Reverend Thompson gives a short prayer of thanksgiving, and even those not particularly religious murmur amen. In the hold, the purser makes his daily inspection. His heart is in his throat as he descends the ladder. Has the mail survived? He unlocks the mailroom door and swings it wide. The pouches hang in their places, slightly damp but intact. He feels each one carefully. Our letters pouch is dry to the touch. The mail has survived the storm, protected by the stout walls of its room and the skill of the ship's builders. He makes his notation in the log. Day 8 at sea. Weathered storm from NW. Ship secure. Mail undamaged. Simple words that document a small victory against the ocean's power. As the day progresses, the ship settles back into her routine. The damage is repaired, the sails are mended, and the Mercury continues her westward course. Behind her, the storm moves off toward Europe. Ahead, 2,000 miles of ocean still separate the ship from her destination. But she has proven herself, and her crew has proven themselves, and the journey continues. 2 weeks into the voyage, the Mercury enters a stretch of calm water. The wind, which has been their constant companion, dies away to nothing. The sails hang limp from the yards, barely stirring. The ship sits on water as smooth as glass, her reflection perfect beneath her, going nowhere. These are the doldrums, and every sailor dreads them. Without wind, the ship cannot move. She can only drift with whatever current exists, making perhaps 10 or 15 miles in a day when she should be making 150. Time stretches out endlessly. Rations must be calculated and recalculated. How long will they be becalmed? Days? Weeks? The sea in the doldrums has a peculiar beauty. It is so calm that birds can land on it and rest. Flying fish break the surface and glide for incredible distances before splashing back into the water. Sometimes, sharks circle the ship, their fins cutting the surface like dark knives. The sailors watch them with a mixture of fascination and superstitious dread. Heat becomes oppressive. The sun beats down from a cloudless sky, and there is no breeze to cool the skin. On deck, the tar between the planks softens and becomes sticky underfoot. Below, the cabins are stifling. Passengers spend their days on deck, seeking whatever shade they can find under improvised awnings. They trail their hands in the water, which is bathwater warm. Captain Rothwell studies his charts and makes calculations. They have drifted south of their optimal course. When the wind returns, they will need to tack northward, adding days to the voyage. But there is nothing to be done. The ocean makes its own decisions, and sailors can only adapt. At night, with no moon, the stars are spectacular. The Milky Way spreads across the sky like a river of light. Sailors who know the constellations point them out. There is Cassiopeia, there Orion, there the Southern Cross just visible on the horizon. In the phosphorescent wake, which still glows even though the ship barely moves, tiny creatures sparkle like underwater stars. In the mailroom, our letter rests patient. It does not know about the doldrums, about the lack of wind, about the delay in its journey. It simply exists, waiting for whatever comes next, trusting in the men and the ship to carry it safely across the ocean. On the third day of calm, a ripple appears on the water. It comes from the east, a dark line moving across the glassy surface like a brushstroke on silk. The lookout in the crow's nest sees it first and calls down, "Wind coming!" The crew, listless from days of heat and boredom, stirs to life. Captain Rothwell emerges from his cabin, his shirt sticking to his back with sweat. He watches the approaching wind with the intensity of a farmer watching rain clouds during drought. The ripple grows closer, and then they feel it. The first breath of moving air in 3 days, cool against their skin, blessed relief from the stagnant heat. "All hands to make sail," calls the first mate, and the crew scrambles into action. They have kept the sails loosely furled during the calm, and now they let them drop and shake them out. The canvas, which has hung like dead things, begins to fill. Slowly at first, just a gentle billowing, then more firmly as the wind strengthens. The Mercury begins to move. It is barely perceptible at first, a slight forward motion, the water beginning to gurgle along the hull. But gradually the ship picks up speed. 1 knot, 2 knots, 3. The bow wave appears, white foam curling away from the stem. The wake spreads behind them once more. The ship is alive again, responding to the wind like a horse to the spur. The sailors grin at each other, their spirits lifting with the ship's motion. The passengers, emerging from their stifling cabins, feel the breeze and almost weep with relief. Mrs. Patterson stands at the rail, letting the wind stream through her hair, which she has unpinned for the first time since leaving England. Young Henderson lifts his wife and spins her around on the deck, both of them laughing. The wind continues to build throughout the day, settling into a steady blow from the northeast, perfect for their westward course. The Mercury leans into it, her bow rising and falling in a rhythm that feels almost joyful after the dead calm. By evening, they are making good speed again, and Captain Rothwell marks their position in his log with satisfaction. They have lost time, but they are moving again, and that is what matters. In the mail room, our letter feels the change in motion, the return of the steady rocking that had stopped during the calm. The voyage continues, and with favorable winds, New York draws ever closer. As the Mercury settles back into her westward progress, life aboard ship falls into its established rhythms. The ship's bell marks the passing hours with a ritual older than any man aboard. 8 bells marks the end of each 4-hour watch midnight, for in the morning, 8 in the morning, noon, for in the afternoon, 8 in the evening. Between these major divisions, the hours are counted 1 bell, 2 bells, 3 bells, and so on. Time at sea is measured in bells, and the sound becomes as natural as breathing. The morning watch, from 4 to 8, is considered the most pleasant by many sailors. The air is cool, the sea often calm, and there is the quiet satisfaction of watching the sun rise over the endless water. The night watch goes below to their hammocks, and the day watch takes their places, checking the set of the sails, coiling ropes, holystoning the deck. Holystoning is the work of making the wooden deck white and clean. The sailors kneel on the damp planks with blocks of sandstone, called holystones because the men kneel as if in prayer, and scrub in rhythm, working their way across the deck. It is hard, monotonous work, but it serves a purpose beyond cleanliness. It keeps the wood from rotting, and it keeps the men occupied, which on a long voyage is almost as important. At 8 bells in the morning, the watch changes again, and breakfast is served. The ship's cook, a one-legged man named Griggs who lost his leg to a cannonball in the last war, presides over the galley, a brick-lined space with an iron stove that is kept burning day and night. He produces the morning meal with the limited ingredients at his disposal. Burgoo, a porridge made from oatmeal and molasses, ship's biscuit, and coffee strong enough to dissolve a spoon. The passengers gather in their common area, while the officers eat in the captain's cabin, served by a cabin boy. The meals are simple, but there is a comfort in their regularity. At sea, where so much is uncertain, the routine of meals provides a small anchor to normalcy. After breakfast, the ship's work continues. Sails are checked for wear and mended if necessary. Ropes are inspected and replaced if they show signs of chafing. The bosun organizes work parties to maintain the ship. Painting, tarring, splicing. There is always work aboard a ship, for the sea is hard on everything. Wood, rope, canvas, iron, and men. The passengers find their own ways to pass the time. Mr. Blackwood maintains a journal, recording each day's events and his observations of sea life. The Reverend Thompson has struck up conversations with several crew members, trying to save their souls from the sins of drinking and swearing. Young Henderson practices his navigation with a borrowed sextant, hoping to be useful in his new country. 3 weeks into the voyage, the Mercury reaches the middle of the Atlantic. Captain Rothwell marks the position in his log. Latitude 42 degrees north, longitude 45 degrees west. They are now equidistant from Europe and America, suspended in the middle of the ocean with no land in any direction for 1,000 miles. This is a strange feeling even for experienced sailors. To be so completely surrounded by water, to know that if you fell overboard, the sea beneath you is 3 miles deep, to understand that you are utterly dependent on this wooden ship and the skill of her crew. It produces a mixture of awe and humility that is difficult to describe. The ocean here is a deep, dark blue, almost purple in the shadows of waves. The water is so clear that when dolphins come to play at the bow, as they do several times during these middle weeks, You can see them swimming beneath the surface, their bodies sleek and graceful, their movements effortless. They leap and spin, seeming to take joy in the ship's company, racing alongside and crossing back and forth beneath the bow wave. The passengers gather to watch the dolphins, delighted by this break in the monotony. Even the most seasick passengers drag themselves on deck to see. There is something about these creatures, their intelligence evident in their eyes, their playfulness, their beauty, that lifts the human spirit. For a few minutes, the tedium of the voyage is forgotten in watching their acrobatic display. Bird life changes as they cross the ocean. The gulls that followed them from Dover are long gone. Now they see other species. Petrels that skim the wave tops with barely a wing beat, shearwaters that glide for minutes without seeming to exert any effort, and occasionally the magnificent albatross, with wings spanning 10 feet or more, soaring effortlessly on the wind. Sailors regard the albatross with superstitious reverence. To kill one is considered terrible luck, for they are thought to be the souls of dead sailors, condemned to wander the oceans forever. When one follows the ship, as one does for 2 days during this crossing, the men watch it with a mixture of admiration and unease. The weather in mid-ocean is changeable. Clear mornings can turn to fog by afternoon. Sudden squalls race across the water, bringing rain and wind that lasts an hour and then passes, leaving the air washed clean and smelling of salt. At night, if there is no moon, the darkness is absolute. A darkness unknown on land, where there is always some light, however faint. Here, the darkness is complete, broken only by the ship's lanterns and the stars overhead. In the mailroom, our letter has now been at sea for 3 weeks. The leather of its pouch has taken on the smell of the ship, tar and salt and damp wood. The letter itself remains dry and safe, the red wax seal intact, Thomas Whitmore's careful script still crisp and legible, waiting to be read by his brother on the far shore. Life at sea requires skills that landlubbers can scarcely imagine. A sailor must be part acrobat, part carpenter, part weather prophet, part warrior. The men aboard the Mercury possess these skills in varying degrees, learned through years of experience, passed down from older sailors to younger in an apprenticeship as old as seafaring itself. High in the rigging, where the ship's motion is amplified to a dizzying degree, men work with casual competence that looks like madness from the deck. They climb the ratlins, rope ladders that lead up to the yards with bare feet, gripping with their toes, using their hands to pull themselves upward. At the top, they edge out along the yards, their feet on foot ropes that swing beneath the spar, their bodies bent over the yard itself as they wrestle with canvas that the wind wants to tear from their hands. The first time young Henderson watches sailors reefing a topsail in a fresh breeze, he cannot believe what he is seeing. The men are 90 feet above the deck, clinging to a piece of wood 18 inches in diameter, leaning out over empty space to gather armfuls of thrashing canvas and tie it to the yard with short pieces of line called reef points. The ship is rolling through 20 degrees or more, which means these men are swinging through an arc of 40 feet side to side, all while doing precise work with their hands. How do they not fall? He asks an old sailor named Tom, who is watching from the deck. They do, sometimes, Tom replies matter-of-factly. Lost a good man that way 2 voyages ago. Missed his footing in a blow. Gone before we could even think about turning the ship around. But mostly they don't fall because they are skilled and careful and they know their lives depend on doing the work correctly. They trust their hands and feet, trust the strength they've built from years of this labor, trust their knowledge of how to move when the world beneath them is in constant motion. Below deck, other skills are practiced. The carpenter, Mr. Willis, maintains his workshop in a corner of the hold, where he has tools hung neatly on boards and spare wood stored for repairs. He makes everything the ship needs, new blocks for the rigging, replacements for broken deck planks, even furniture for the captain's cabin. The sound of his saw and plane and hammer is a constant background music to life aboard. The sailmaker, Jenkins, works in all weather, his curved needle never still. He doesn't just repair torn sails. He makes new ones, cutting and shaping the heavy canvas according to patterns he keeps in his head, gained from a lifetime of this work. His stitches are small and even, each one pulled tight so the seam will hold in the strongest wind. The cook, despite his wooden leg, moves about his galley with surprising agility, bracing himself against the stove when the ship rolls, timing his movements to the ship's rhythm. He can make a meal in weather that would defeat a cook on land, can boil water when the pot wants to slide off the stove, can cut meat when the deck beneath him is tilting at crazy angles. These men, with their specialized skills, keep the ship running. They are a community of craftsmen, each one essential, each one respected for what he brings to the common effort of getting the Mercury safely across the ocean. Evening aboard the Mercury brings a softening of the day's labors. When the sun sets and the ship settles into the night routine, with reduced sail and a quiet watch on deck, the off-duty sailors gather in the FOCSLE to tell stories and sing songs. The FOCSLE, the forecastle, is the sailors' home. It is cramped and dim, lit by a few lanterns that swing with the ship's motion, but it is their space, where officers rarely venture. Here, hierarchies relax somewhat. A common seaman might joke with the boatswain's mate. The ship's boy, barely 14, listens wide-eyed to the tales of the older men. Old Tom is the best storyteller. He has been to sea for 37 years, visiting ports all over the world, and he has accumulated a treasury of stories. Tonight, he tells them about the time his ship was becalmed off the coast of Africa for 6 weeks, until they were down to quarter rations and drinking water that had turned green in the barrels. "We caught a sea turtle," he says, his weathered face animated in the lamplight. "Big as a wagon wheel it was. Took 4 of us to haul it aboard. The cook made soup from it that fed the whole crew for 3 days. And I tell you, I've never tasted anything finer." The men listen, nodding. Most of them have their own stories of hunger and hardship at sea. But Tom's telling makes even old stories fresh. He has a gift for it, a sense of timing, a way of building suspense even when everyone knows how the story ends. When the storytelling winds down, someone starts a song. Sea shanties are the working songs of sailors, with rhythms designed for hauling ropes or pushing the capstan bars around. But in the evening, in the FOCSLE, they sing other songs. Ballads about sailors and their sweethearts, laments for ships lost at sea, humorous songs about officers and their quirks. One man has a fiddle, battered and scarred but still playable, and he draws out melodies that float through the ship. In the passengers' quarters, they can hear the music faintly, and it's somehow comforting, proof of life, of spirits not broken by the monotony of the voyage. Young Henderson has been invited to the FOCSLE this evening, a rare privilege for a passenger. He sits on a sea chest in the corner, trying not to take up too much space, listening to the songs and the stories. He is learning what it means to be at sea, to be part of this community of men who have chosen this hard life for reasons they might not even be able to articulate. The Reverend Thompson would disapprove. The sailors' songs are not always proper, and their language is rough. But there is a fellowship here, a genuine warmth that comes from shared experience and shared danger. These men depend on each other absolutely. When a storm comes, each man's life may depend on another doing his job correctly. This creates bonds that are different from those on land but no less real. As the evening deepens and the songs grow quieter, one by one the men climb into their hammocks. The FOCSLE settles into the sounds of sleep, snoring, the creak of hammocks swaying, the ever-present sounds of the ship herself. Tomorrow will bring another day of ocean and sky, of work and waiting, of the slow progress westward toward America. And in the mail room, still locked and dark, our letter rests among its fellows, drawing ever closer to its destination. For weeks at sea now, perhaps 2 more to go if the winds are favorable. The journey is more than half over, though the letter knows nothing of time or distance, knows only the patient waiting that inanimate things do so well. In the 5th week of the voyage, the Mercury approaches the Grand Banks of Newfoundland. These are vast underwater plateaus where the ocean is relatively shallow, 100 fathoms instead of the thousands of fathoms of the deep Atlantic. The waters here are among the richest fishing grounds in the world, teeming with cod and other species. The first sign of the banks is the fog. It rolls in thick and white, reducing visibility to a few dozen yards. The temperature drops noticeably. Captain Rothwell orders the ship's speed reduced and posts extra lookouts. These waters are dangerous. Other ships fish here, icebergs drift down from Greenland, and the fog can hide dangers until it's too late to avoid them. The fog is so thick it seems to have substance. It beads on the rigging and drips onto the deck. It muffles sounds, making the ship feel isolated, cut off from the world. The sailors speak in quieter voices, as if the fog demands reverence. Every half hour, the ship's bell is rung, a signal to other vessels that might be near. In the distance, sometimes, they hear answering bells, ghostly and directionless in the fog. They pass close to a fishing vessel, appearing suddenly out of the whiteness like a phantom. The fishermen are hauling nets heavy with cod, their small boat riding low in the water. They wave to the mercury, and the gesture is returned. Then the fog swallows them again, and it's as if they were never there. Birds are everywhere in these waters. Gulls and terns wheel and cry, their calls echoing strangely in the fog. They rest on the water in great rafts, rising all together when the ship approaches, a thunder of wings in the whiteness. The passengers, coming on deck despite the damp cold, are amazed at the abundance of life compared to the empty ocean they've crossed. "Are we near land?" Mrs. Blackwood asks hopefully. The voyage has been hard on her, and she longs for solid ground. "Not yet, ma'am," replies the first mate kindly. "But we're approaching the Western Ocean. Another week, perhaps 10 days, and you'll see the coast of America." The thought energizes the passengers. They have been at sea for 5 weeks, and the prospect of landfall is suddenly real, no longer a distant abstraction. Even the sailors, who have made this crossing many times, feel a quickening of interest. Every voyage is long, and every landfall is a small miracle, the successful conclusion of a journey that could have ended in disaster 1,000 times over. The fog persists for 3 days. On the third morning, the wind shifts to the west, and the fog begins to thin and finally clears. The sun breaks through, and suddenly the world has color again. Blue sky, blue water, white sails. The passengers cheer, and even the sailors smile. Captain Rothwell takes a sun's sight with his sextant, the first he's been able to take in 3 days. He works out their position and nods with satisfaction. They are on course, making good time. The wind is favorable. All is well. The wind that cleared the fog continues to blow fresh from the west, directly contrary to their course. The Mercury must tack, sailing at an angle to the wind, zigzagging her way westward. It is slower progress, and it requires constant attention from the crew, but it is progress nonetheless. Tacking is a maneuver that requires precision and coordination. The captain chooses his moment based on the wind and the waves. "Ready about," he calls, and the crew takes their positions. "Helms a-lee." The wheel is turned, and the ship begins to swing through the wind. As the bow crosses the wind's direction, the sails begin to flap and thunder, and the crew must quickly trim them for the new direction. Mainsail haul. The big mainsail is hauled around, the yards are braced, and the ship settles on her new course. They tack every few hours, the ship making a series of long diagonal legs across the ocean. It is tedious work, and the sailors grow tired of it, but there is no choice. The wind will blow from where it will, and sailors can only adapt. Despite the headwinds, there is a sense of anticipation building aboard the ship. They are approaching America. The passengers spend more time on deck, scanning the western horizon as if they might see land at any moment, though they are still days away. They talk about their plans, their hopes for their new lives in the new nation. Mr. Blackwood plans to establish himself as a merchant in New York, importing English goods. He has contacts there, letters of introduction from London merchants, and enough capital to start properly. His wife is less enthusiastic. She has left behind her family, her friends, everything familiar, but she is determined to make the best of it. The Reverend Thompson speaks of his calling to bring the gospel to the expanding frontier. He has been assigned to a small congregation in the Hudson Valley, and he carries with him not only his Bible but also books for a lending library he hopes to establish. Young Henderson has no concrete plan except to find work and make his fortune. He is a carpenter by trade, and he has heard that in America, a skilled craftsman can do well. His wife holds his arm and looks westward, her face a mixture of fear and hope. Mrs. Patterson, the widow, says little about her plans. She will live with her sister, help with the children, make herself useful. It is not the life she imagined when she married, but it is a life, and after the grief of the past months, that seems like enough. As the ship tacks back and forth across the ocean, drawing slowly closer to the American coast, the mood aboard shifts subtly. The timeless quality of the mid-ocean voyage gives way to expectation. They are travelers again, not just people suspended in the vastness of the sea. They have somewhere to go, and they are almost there. In the mail room, our letter waits. It has traveled more than 2,000 miles from London. A few hundred more, and its journey will be complete. The words Thomas Whitmore wrote by candlelight in his quiet room will reach his brother Samuel in New York, bringing news from home across the ocean divide. On the 38th day at sea, the lookout in the crow's nest calls down the words everyone has been waiting to hear. Land ho! 2 points off the starboard bow. Every passenger rushes on deck. Every sailor not actively working comes to the rail. There, on the western horizon, is a low dark line that is not clouds, not waves, but solid earth. America. The sight produces different emotions in different people. Some passengers weep with relief. Others stand in awed silence. The sailors, who have seen this sight many times, still feel satisfaction. Another successful crossing, another landfall achieved. Captain Rothwell allows himself a small smile. He has brought his ship and her passengers safely across the Atlantic, and barring disaster in these last miles, he will deliver them to New York as promised. As the day progresses and the ship draws nearer, the land resolves into details. Low hills covered with forest, the white line of breaking surf. Eventually, individual trees become visible, and then buildings, a lighthouse, a church steeple. The coast of Long Island stretches before them, and Captain Rothwell adjusts course to enter the approaches to New York Harbor. Birds appear in great numbers, gulls and terns, different species from those in English waters but filling the same niche, crying and wheeling around the ship. The water changes color, from the deep blue of the ocean to a greenish hue closer to shore, full of sediment from rivers and harbors. They pass other ships, coastal trading vessels, fishing boats, a naval frigate at anchor. The crews wave to each other in the fellowship of the sea. The Mercury has come from far away, but these waters are busy with local traffic, and she is just one ship among many. As evening approaches, Captain Rothwell makes the decision to anchor for the night rather than attempt the harbor approach in darkness. The ship comes to rest in Sandy Hook Bay, her anchor chain rumbling through the hawse-hole. The motion of the ship changes immediately. Instead of the forward progress that has been constant for 5 weeks, she now swings slowly around her anchor, responsive to the tide rather than the wind. That night, the passengers cannot sleep for excitement. They pack their belongings, write letters to be posted as soon as they reach New York, make plans for their first days ashore. In the FOCSLE, the sailors are more subdued. For them, New York means a few days ashore, perhaps a week, and then another cargo, another voyage back to England or to some other port. The sea is their life and land is just an intermission. But for our letter, still locked in the mailroom, the proximity of land means the sea voyage is nearly over. Tomorrow, the Mercury will enter New York Harbor, and the letter will be transferred to the post office there. From ship to shore, from one system to another, the journey continues, each leg bringing it closer to the hands of Samuel Whitmore, who waits unknowing in his shop on Pearl Street, not yet aware that his brother has written, that news from home is on its way. Morning breaks clear and bright, with a favorable wind from the southwest. The Mercury weighs anchor and makes her approach to New York Harbor. The entrance to the harbor is a narrow strait called the Narrows, where the land pinches in from both sides, and the ship must navigate carefully through the channel. As they pass through the Narrows, the land is close on both sides. Close enough to see individual houses, to smell the earth and trees, to hear sounds from shore. A dog barking, someone splitting wood, a church bell ringing the hour. After 5 weeks of nothing but ocean, these simple sounds of human habitation are almost overwhelming. Then the harbor opens before them, and the passengers see New York for the first time. The city occupies the southern tip of Manhattan Island, a jumble of buildings clustered around the waterfront, church spires rising above the rooflines, smoke from countless chimneys hazying the air. It is not large by European standards, perhaps 25,000 souls, but it is vibrant, growing, full of the energy of a young nation finding its feet. The harbor is busy with vessels of every description. Merchant ships from a dozen nations ride at anchor, their flags identifying them British, Dutch, French, Spanish. Small boats move between the ships and the shore like water beetles, carrying goods and passengers. A ferry crosses from Manhattan to Brooklyn, its oars rising and falling in rhythm. Fishing boats head out for the day's work, passing the incoming Mercury with barely a glance. Captain Rothwell guides his ship to an anchorage off the East River wharves. The anchor is dropped once more, and the ship swings to face the current. Almost immediately, small boats begin to approach, customs officials who must inspect the cargo, harbor pilots, merchants looking for business, and vendors selling fresh food to ships just arrived. The passengers gather their belongings and prepare to disembark. They have been transformed by the voyage. Thinner, tougher, more worn than when they left England. Mrs. Blackwood's fashionable dress is out of style and shabby from weeks of wear. The Reverend Thompson's white collar is gray despite repeated washing. Young Henderson has the beginning of a sailor's squint from weeks of sun and wind. But they have made it. They have crossed the ocean and arrived in the New World. A boat comes alongside to take them ashore, and one by one they descend the ladder, carrying their trunks and bags, leaving the Mercury behind. The ship that has been their home, their whole world, for more than 5 weeks becomes just another vessel in the harbor, remarkable only to those who have lived aboard her. But the mail is not yet delivered. The leather pouches are brought up from the mail room, blinking in the sunlight after weeks of darkness. Our letters pouch is handed to the postal agent who has come aboard, and he signs for it in the purser's log. The mail is then lowered into his boat, and he rows toward the shore, toward the post office, toward the next stage of our letter's journey. Morning comes slowly to London. The letter rests on Thomas's desk overnight, waiting. When dawn breaks gray and soft through the fog, a maidservant enters to tend the fire, and Thomas gives her the letter with a coin. "For the post," he says, and she nods, tucking both into her apron pocket. The General Post Office stands on Lombard Street, an imposing building of Portland stone that has processed the hopes and business of an empire for decades. By 7 in the morning, its great wooden doors are already open, and people queue in the entrance hall. The air smells of damp wool and sealing wax, of ink and old paper, of the thousands upon thousands of letters that have passed through these doors. Our letter makes its journey in the maidservant's careful hands, past the coffee houses where merchants are just beginning their morning business, past the flower sellers setting up their baskets, past the crossing sweepers clearing the night's debris from the cobblestones. London is waking, stretching, coming alive in degrees. First the bakers with their warm bread, then the milk sellers with their calls, then the great flow of humanity that fills these streets like water finding channels. At the post office window, she hands over the letter and the coins for postage. The clerk, a thin man with spectacles perched on his nose, weighs it on a small brass scale. "New York," he reads from the address and nods. 3 shillings 6 pence. The coins clink into his drawer, and he applies an inked stamp to the letter's face. A postmark showing the date and London in an arc. The letter disappears into a canvas sack with dozens of others, all bound for distant places, all carrying their small cargoes of human connection across the miles. The New York Post Office operates differently from London's. New York is small enough that much of the mail is simply held for collection. A notice is posted in the window listing the names of those who have letters waiting, and people come to collect them when they see their names. But some letters are delivered by a postal carrier who makes rounds through the city twice a week. Our letter, being from overseas and therefore presumably important, is marked for delivery. It is placed in a leather satchel with a dozen other letters for the waterfront district. The satchel is given to the delivery boy, a 14-year-old named William who has worked for the post office for 2 years. "Pearl Street," says Bauman, handing him the satchel. "And mind you don't lose any. These have come all the way from England." William nods seriously. He knows the importance of his work. Letters are precious things, especially letters from across the ocean. They carry news of births and deaths, of business opportunities and family matters, of the thousand small details that keep people connected across vast distances. He slings the satchel over his shoulder and steps out into the bustling streets of New York. The city is loud and alive. Cart wheels on cobblestones, street vendors calling their wares, ship's bells from the harbor, the general hum of humanity going about its business. William has lived in New York all his life, and he navigates the streets with easy familiarity, heading south toward Pearl Street and the waterfront. William steps out onto Garden Street and turns south, the leather satchel heavy against his hip. The day is warm for late autumn, and the streets of New York are filled with the bustle of commerce and daily life. This is a city rebuilding itself after the long years of war, still bearing scars but full of energy and optimism. The buildings are mostly wood, 2 or 3 stories tall, with steep roofs and many chimneys. Some are painted in bright colors, red, yellow, blue, while others show bare weathered wood. The streets are narrow and winding, following paths that were ancient when the Dutch first settled here, paved with cobblestones that make walking uneven and turn wet streets into treacherous passages. William walks at a steady pace, neither hurrying nor dawdling. He has learned that a postal carrier must be methodical. Rushing leads to mistakes, and mistakes in mail delivery are serious matters. He carries letters from loved ones, business correspondence worth hundreds of pounds, news that might change lives. Each letter in his satchel is a small responsibility, and he takes his work seriously. He passes a market where vendors sell vegetables from Long Island farms, fish caught that morning in the harbor, bread still warm from the ovens. A woman haggles over the price of apples while her children tug at her skirts. A merchant examines a barrel of flour, testing its quality. 2 men argue about politics, something about tariffs and trade with England. Life flows around William as he walks, and he is part of it, a small but necessary piece of the city's functioning. At the corner of Broad Street, he stops to deliver a letter to a lawyer's office. The clerk signs for it in William's delivery book, and William continues on. Each delivery brings him closer to Pearl Street, closer to the moment when our letter will reach its final destination. The city smells of many things, with smoke from cooking fires, the salt smell of the harbor, horses and their droppings, fresh bread, fish, tar from the shipyards. It is not always pleasant, but it is alive, vital, the smell of a place where things are happening, where the future is being built. William crosses Wall Street, once the northern boundary of the city where a wooden wall protected the Dutch settlement from attack. The wall is long gone, but the street remains, now home to merchants and traders who do business in the coffee houses and counting houses that line it. He glances down the street toward Trinity Church, its steeple the tallest structure in the city, a landmark visible from the harbor. Pearl Street is just ahead now, running parallel to the East River. William can hear the sounds of the waterfront, the creak of ships rigging, the calls of sailors, the thump of cargo being loaded and unloaded. This is the commercial heart of New York, where the city meets the sea, where goods from around the world arrive and are distributed throughout the young nation. Pearl Street follows the curve of the East River shoreline, lined with shops and warehouses and the homes of merchants who like to live close to their businesses. The street got its name from the oyster shells that once littered the shore, gleaming like pearls in the sun. The oysters are mostly gone now, harvested into scarcity, but the name remains. William walks along the street, checking the numbers on the buildings against the address on our letter. Number 43, 45, 47. He is getting close. The buildings here are substantial, well-maintained, speaking of prosperity. Many have shops on the ground floor with living quarters above. Signs hang from iron brackets. A chandler, a rope maker, a seller of ship's provisions, a merchant who deals in dry goods. Number 51 Pearl Street is a 3-story building with a shop front on the ground floor. Through the windows, William can see shelves lined with goods, bolts of cloth, mostly, and some ready-made clothing. A sign over the door reads S. Whitmore and Company Draper and Clothier. This is the place. William pushes open the door, and a bell jingles above his head. The shop is quiet at this hour, the morning rush of customers having passed and the afternoon trade not yet begun. The interior smells pleasantly of new cloth and the lavender sachets used to keep moths away. Sunlight streams through the windows, illuminating dust motes in the air. Behind the counter stands a man in his middle 30s, wearing a leather apron over a simple waistcoat and breeches. He is tallying figures in a ledger, his pen moving with careful precision. He looks up at the sound of the bell, and his face shows the automatic pleasant expression of a shopkeeper greeting a potential customer. "Good afternoon," he says. "How may I help you?" "Letter for Mr. Samuel Whitmore," William announces, reaching into his satchel. The man's expression changes. Surprise, pleasure, curiosity. "I am Samuel Whitmore," he says, setting down his pen. William finds the letter, Thomas Whitmore's letter, which has traveled from London to Dover by mail coach, from Dover to New York by packet ship, and now through the streets of New York to this shop. He holds it out and Samuel takes it, his hands slightly stained with ink from his ledger work. Samuel looks at the address, written in a hand he knows as well as his own. His breath catches slightly. "From Thomas," he says quietly. He turns the letter over, examining the red wax seal with its impressed W, still intact after its long journey. "Anything else for this address?" Samuel asks, his eyes not leaving the letter. "No, sir, just the one." Samuel reaches into his pocket and gives William a coin. More than necessary, but William has brought news from home, and that is worth something extra. William touches his cap in thanks and leaves, the bell jingling again as the door closes behind him. Samuel Whitmore stands alone in his shop, holding the letter from his brother. For a moment, he simply looks at it, this small folded piece of paper that has crossed an ocean to reach him. His thumb traces the wax seal, feeling the impression of the family initial. He has not seen Thomas in 4 years, not since Samuel left England to seek his fortune in America. The decision to leave had been difficult. He and Thomas had been close growing up, partners in the small business their father had left them. But Samuel had felt the pull of the new world, the opportunities in a young nation where a man could rise by his own efforts rather than being bound by the rigid class structures of England. Thomas had understood, even as he chose to stay. Someone needed to maintain the London end of what they hoped would become a transatlantic trading business. They had parted with plans to write regularly, to visit when possible, to remain partners even across the distance. But letters take months, and the ocean is wide, and 4 years have passed with only a dozen letters exchanged. Samuel knows the major events of Thomas's life. His marriage 2 years ago, his expansion into a second shop, but there are vast gaps, whole seasons of life that have passed uncommunicated. He breaks the seal carefully, unfolding the paper. The letter is dated September 15th, 2 months ago. Thomas's handwriting is neat and familiar, and Samuel can almost hear his brother's voice in the words. "My dear brother Samuel, I hope this letter finds you well and prospering in your shop. We are all in good health here, though mother complains of the damp getting into her bones now that autumn has arrived. The doctor says it is only to be expected at her age, and she remains in good spirits despite the discomfort. Business continues well. I have taken on an apprentice, young John Harris from Cheapside, who shows promise. You would approve of his diligence. The new shop on Newgate Street is proving successful, and I am considering whether to expand further, though I hesitate to overextend." Samuel reads slowly, savoring each detail. Mother's health always a concern. The business doing well, good news. An apprentice, Thomas always had a good eye for talent. He pictures his brother in the familiar London shop, conducting business in the methodical way they were both taught by their father. "I must tell you that Elizabeth is with child. We expect the baby in March, God willing. She is well but grows tired easily, which the midwife assures us is normal. I confess I am both excited and terrified by the prospect of fatherhood. I find myself thinking of father and how he raised us with firmness but also kindness. I hope I can do half as well." Samuel pauses, a smile spreading across his face. A nephew or niece, arriving in the spring. Thomas, a father. It seems impossible, they are both still young in his mind, but of course time passes the same for everyone, whether separated by an ocean or not. "I write also on a matter of business. I have made contact with a supplier of fine wool from Yorkshire who offers excellent terms. I am sending samples by this same ship, addressed to you separately. If you find the quality satisfactory, I believe we could establish a profitable trade. I send the wool to you, you sell it in America where I understand such goods command good prices, and we split the profit. Please examine the samples and write to me with your thoughts. Business. Even across the ocean, the brothers remained partners. Samuel makes a mental note to check with the customs house for the wool samples. If the quality is good, this could indeed be profitable. Americans are hungry for quality English goods, and a direct family connection would cut out the middlemen who usually take a large share of the profit. The letter continues with smaller news, friends who have married or moved, changes in the neighborhood, the price of various goods, the political situation. Samuel reads it all, treasuring each detail, each small window into the life he left behind. Samuel finishes reading and carefully refolds the letter, though not quite along the original creases. He will read it again tonight, probably several times more over the coming days, until he has memorized every word. Then he will file it away with the other letters from Thomas, a growing archive of their separated lives. He looks around his shop, his achievement built from nothing in 4 years. The shelves are well stocked with cloth and ready-made garments. He employs 2 assistants and has established good relationships with suppliers and customers. By any measure, his venture to America has been successful. But success has its cost, and Samuel feels it now, holding the letter. He has missed 4 years of his brother's life. He was not there when Thomas married. He will not be there when Thomas's child is born. He has not seen their mother in 4 years, and she is growing old. These are the sacrifices that distance demands. Yet the letter bridges that distance, at least partially. Through Thomas's words, Samuel can see London, the shop, the familiar streets, the faces of people he knows. The letter makes Thomas present in a way that memory alone cannot. It is proof that the bond between them endures, that the ocean is wide but not infinite, that communication is possible even across 3,000 miles. Samuel thinks about his own life, the things he will write to Thomas in return. He will congratulate him on the coming baby, offer advice, though he has no children himself, promise to send a gift when the child is born. He will discuss the wool samples, give his opinion on the business proposal. He will describe New York, how it has grown, how business is thriving, how the young nation is finding its footing. But he will also write about the loneliness, though he will phrase it carefully. How it feels to be far from family. How he lies awake sometimes at night thinking about London, wondering what he has given up for opportunity. How success means something different when there is no family nearby to share it with. The door opens and a customer enters. Mrs. Van Cortlandt, looking for fabric for new curtains. Samuel tucks the letter carefully into his waistcoat pocket, close to his heart, and turns to his customer with a professional smile. Good afternoon, Mrs. Van Cortlandt. How may I help you today? Business continues. Life continues. But the letter rests in his pocket, a tangible connection to home, a reminder that he is part of a family even though an ocean separates them. Tonight, after the shop closes, he will sit at his desk with pen and paper and begin his reply. The cycle will continue, letters crossing and recrossing the Atlantic, carrying news and love and connection across the miles. And so our letter has completed its journey. From Thomas's desk in London to Samuel's pocket in New York, it has traveled by coach and ship and foot, carried by dozens of people who never read its contents but whose work made this communication possible. The mail system, that marvel of organization and logistics, has done what it was designed to do. Connect people across distance, shrink the world, make absence a little less complete. That evening, after closing his shop, Samuel climbs the stairs to his living quarters above. He lives modestly, a combination parlor and dining room, a small bedroom, a kitchen where his housekeeper prepares his meals. The rooms are neat and comfortable but lack the warmth of family. It is a bachelor's lodging, functional but impersonal. He lights candles against the gathering darkness and sits at his writing desk. The desk is mahogany, one of the few fine pieces of furniture he has allowed himself. It was made by a local craftsman, and Samuel likes its simple, solid construction. On it rests his writing implements: pen, ink, blotting paper, sealing wax, and a supply of good writing paper imported from England. He takes out Thomas's letter and reads it once more, noting the things he will need to address in his reply. Then he positions a fresh sheet of paper, dips his pen, and begins to write. My dear brother Thomas, your letter of September 15th reached me today, having made the crossing in good time. I was overjoyed to hear of Elizabeth's condition and send my heartiest congratulations to you both. To think that I shall be an uncle in the spring, it hardly seems possible. I shall send a gift for the child as soon as I can arrange something suitable. Perhaps a silver rattle or cup, which I understand are traditional. Samuel pauses, considering his words. Writing a letter is different from conversation. Each word must be chosen carefully, for there is no opportunity to explain or clarify immediately. A misunderstood sentence could lead to confusion or hurt that would persist for months until another exchange of letters could clear it up. He continues, writing about his business, about New York, about the wool samples he will inquire after. He describes the city's growth, the optimism of Americans about their new nation, the opportunities he sees. He writes warmly but honestly, sharing his success but also his occasional loneliness. As he writes, he is aware that his letter will follow the same path as Thomas's, but in reverse. Tomorrow he will take it to the post office, where it will join other letters bound for England. It will wait for a packet ship, cross the Atlantic, be sorted in the London post office, and finally arrive at Thomas's shop on Cheapside. The journey will take 2 months, perhaps longer if the weather is bad. By the time Thomas reads these words, winter will have arrived in full force, and Elizabeth will be growing large with child. Samuel's congratulations will arrive belatedly, as all communication across such distance must be belated. But they will arrive, and Thomas will know that his brother, far away in America, shares his joy. Samuel writes for an hour, filling 2 full sheets of paper with his neat script. He writes until his hand cramps and the candles burn low. Finally, he signs his name, blots the ink carefully, and folds the letter in the traditional way, thirds one over the other, then sealed with red wax impressed with his signet ring. Tomorrow this letter will begin its own journey, and the connection between the brothers will continue, maintained by these paper messengers that cross and recross the ocean, carrying news and love across the vast distance that separates them. The next morning, Samuel brings his letter to the post office on Garden Street. Sebastian Baumann is at his desk, sorting through the mail that has accumulated overnight. He looks up as Samuel enters, recognizing him from yesterday's delivery. Good morning, Mr. Whitmore. I trust your letter from England brought good news. Very good news, thank you. My brother is to be a father in the spring. Congratulations. And now you're sending a reply, I see. Baumann takes the letter, examines the address, and weighs it on his small scale. That will be 1 shilling 6 for London. Samuel pays the postage, and Baumann applies his postmark, a circular stamp with New York, and the date. The letter is added to a growing pile of correspondence bound for England. There are perhaps 20 letters in the pile already, from various New Yorkers writing to family, business associates, and correspondents across the Atlantic. The next packet for England departs in 4 days, Baumann tells him. Your letter should reach London by late January, God willing and weather permitting. Samuel nods. January, 2 months from now. By then, Elizabeth will be quite far along in her pregnancy. His congratulations will arrive at an appropriate time, he hopes. He imagines Thomas reading his letter, pleased to hear from his brother, reassured that the connection between them remains strong despite the distance. As Samuel leaves the post office and returns to his shop, his letter joins the system, the vast, complex network of people and ships and sorting offices that makes transatlantic communication possible. It is a marvel of the age, this ability to send words across an ocean with reasonable confidence they will arrive safely. But it is also fragile. Ships sink in storms. Letters are lost. The system depends on hundreds of people doing their jobs correctly, postal clerks, mail carriers, ship captains, sailors. Any failure in this chain, and the letter might never reach its destination. Yet the system works more often than not. Every week, letters cross the Atlantic in both directions. News of births and deaths, of business opportunities and family matters, of the thousand small details that make up human life. All of this travels back and forth across the ocean, maintaining the connections between the old world and the new. Samuel's letter sits in the post office, waiting for its journey to begin. In 4 days, it will be carried aboard a packet ship, perhaps even the Mercury, if she has finished unloading and taken on cargo for the return voyage. It will spend weeks at sea, riding the same waves that brought Thomas's letter to New York. It will arrive in Dover, be carried to London by mail coach, be sorted in the General Post Office, and finally be delivered to Thomas's shop on Cheapside. And Thomas will break the seal and read his brother's words, and the cycle will continue. An endless correspondence that bridges the Atlantic, that keeps two brothers connected despite the 3,000 miles between them. In his shop that afternoon, during a quiet moment between customers, Samuel stands at his window looking out onto Pearl Street. The street is busy with the commerce of the waterfront, carts delivering goods, sailors heading to or from their ships, merchants conducting business in doorways and on street corners. He thinks about the letter he has just sent and the letter he received yesterday. These two pieces of paper, traveling in opposite directions across the ocean, are threads in a web of communication that spans the Atlantic. His letter and Thomas's are just two among thousands, perhaps tens of thousands, that cross the ocean each year, maintaining the connections between America and Europe. Before the postal system existed in its current form, such communication was nearly impossible for ordinary people. Letters might be entrusted to ship captains who would deliver them if convenient, but there was no reliability, no system. The creation of regular packet service, of established post offices, of trained mail carriers, this infrastructure has made it possible for people of moderate means to maintain relationships across vast distances. Samuel thinks about what this means for the world. Families can remain connected even when separated by oceans. Business can be conducted across continents. Ideas can spread from one country to another. The world is becoming smaller, more interconnected, through the simple mechanism of letters carried by ship and coach. Yet there is also something poignant about this form of communication. Letters are always out of date by the time they arrive. The Thomas who wrote the letter Samuel received is not quite the same Thomas who exists now, 2 months later. In those 2 months, he has had experiences, thoughts, and feelings that Samuel knows nothing about. And by the time Thomas receives Samuel's reply, Samuel himself will have changed. They are always writing to the past and receiving news from the past. Their relationship exists in a strange temporal space, always slightly out of sync, each letter a snapshot of a moment that has already passed by the time it is read. A customer enters, breaking Samuel's reverie. He turns from the window with a smile, ready to conduct business. But in the back of his mind, the thought remains. Somewhere out there, a letter with his words is waiting to begin its journey, carrying a piece of his present to his brother's future. And somewhere on the Atlantic, perhaps, other letters are making their crossings, from fathers to sons, from wives to husbands, from friends to friends. The ocean is full of these small messengers, these paper boats carrying human connection across the vastness of water and distance. For days after Samuel posted his letter, the packet ship Britannia prepares to depart New York for London. She is similar to the Mercury, a 3-masted vessel built for speed and mail service, her hull painted dark green with a white stripe, her name in gold letters on her stern. The Britannia has been in New York for 10 days, unloading cargo from England and taking on cargo for the return voyage. Her hold is now full of American goods: tobacco from Virginia, rice from Carolina, lumber from New England, barrels of potash for making soap, and bales of raw cotton. These are the products that America sends to Europe, the raw materials that feed British industry. But most important from our perspective is the mail. The leather pouches from the New York post office are brought aboard in the morning, carried down to the mail room in the stern section of the hold, and secured on shelves just as they were aboard the Mercury. Samuel's letter is in one of these pouches, nestled among dozens of other letters bound for London. The captain of the Britannia is a woman named Margaret Thornton, one of the few female ship captains operating in the Atlantic trade. She inherited the position from her father, who trained her in navigation and seamanship from childhood. The shipping company, initially skeptical, had to admit that she handled the ship as well as any man and better than most. Her crew respects her, and her record of successful crossings speaks for itself. Captain Thornton oversees the final preparations personally. She checks the cargo manifest, ensuring everything is properly stowed and balanced. She inspects the rigging, the sails, the ship's boats. She confers with her first mate about the weather forecast. The wind is favorable from the west, which is less than ideal but workable. They will have to tack as the Mercury did, but they will make progress. The passengers come aboard in the afternoon, 12 of them this voyage, including a family returning to England after 10 years in America, a merchant traveling on business, and a young woman going to visit relatives. They are shown to their cabins and given the same warnings that passengers always receive. Stay off the working parts of the deck, follow the crew's instructions during storms, and prepare for 6 to 8 weeks at sea. As evening approaches, the tide turns favorable. Captain Thornton gives the order to prepare to weigh anchor. The crew moves to their stations with practiced efficiency. The capstan is manned, and the sailors begin pushing the bars around, raising the anchor from the harbor bottom. The familiar work song rises. Leave her, Johnny, leave her. The rhythm keeping their movements synchronized. The anchor breaks free from the mud of New York Harbor, and the Britannia begins to drift with the current. The sails are loosed and drop from their yards, great sheets of canvas that catch the evening breeze. One by one, they are sheeted home and begin to fill. The ship heels slightly as the wind takes hold, and she begins to move under her own power. The harbor is beautiful in the evening light. The sun is setting behind Manhattan, casting long shadows across the water and turning the windows of the city's buildings into squares of gold. Church bells ring the hour 6 o'clock, and their sound carries across the water, a farewell from the land. The Britannia turns her bow eastward, toward the Narrows and the open ocean beyond. She passes anchored ships, some just arrived, some preparing to depart, others waiting for cargo. A naval frigate dips her colors in salute, acknowledging a fellow vessel heading to sea. Captain Thornton returns the salute from her quarterdeck. As they approach the Narrows, the land draws close on both sides. The passengers line the rail, watching the shore slide past. Some wave to people they imagine might see them, though at this distance it's unlikely anyone can distinguish individuals. It's a gesture more for themselves than for anyone ashore. A farewell to America, to friends or family, to a chapter of their lives that is ending. The ship passes through the Narrows and enters the open ocean. The swells are larger here, rolling in from the Atlantic, and the ship's motion changes, becoming more pronounced. Some passengers, feeling the change, hurry below to their cabins, already anticipating seasickness. Others remain on deck, watching as the land recedes behind them. Captain Thornton stands at the rail, looking eastward at the darkening ocean. She has made this crossing 43 times. She knows every mood of the Atlantic, every danger, every peculiarity of weather and current. But each crossing is different, and she never becomes complacent. The ocean demands respect, and she gives it, always vigilant, always prepared for whatever the voyage might bring. As night falls, the land disappears behind them, just a faint glow on the western horizon that might be lights or might be imagination. The Britannia is alone on the ocean now, heading east toward Europe, carrying her cargo of goods and mail and passengers, all of them trusting in the ship and her captain to deliver them safely to their destination. In the mail room, Samuel's letter rests in darkness once more, beginning its own Atlantic crossing. The words he wrote by candlelight in his rooms above the shop on Pearl Street are now at sea, moving steadily eastward, drawing closer to London with each nautical mile the Britannia covers. The eastbound crossing has a different character than the westbound. The prevailing winds are more favorable, generally blowing from west to east, which means the Britannia can make better time than the Mercury did traveling westward. Captain Thornton takes advantage of this, setting as much sail as the ship can safely carry, driving her eastward at good speed. The passengers settle into the routine of shipboard life. They have been through the initial adjustment, the seasickness, the disorientation, the strange feeling of being on a constantly moving surface, and now they adapt. They find their sea legs, learn to walk with the ship's motion rather than fighting it, discover which parts of the ship are most comfortable for passing the long hours of the voyage. The merchant, Mr. Hardwick, spends much of his time in conversation with Captain Thornton, fascinated by the art of navigation. She shows him how to use the sextant, explains how latitude can be determined from the sun's height at noon, describes the challenges of calculating longitude before the development of accurate chronometers. He listens intently, taking notes in a small leather-bound book. The family returning to England, the Jeffersons, with 3 children ranging from 4 to 12, occupy the largest cabin. Mrs. Jefferson organizes lessons for the children each morning, determined that the voyage not interrupt their education. She teaches them mathematics, reading, and geography, using the voyage itself as a lesson in the latter. They track the ship's progress on a chart, marking each day's position, watching the line extend from New York toward England. The young woman, Miss Catherine Miller, keeps to herself mostly, reading novels in her cabin or sitting on deck with needlework. She is engaged to be married to an English officer she has never met, an arrangement made by her father, and she is apprehensive about what awaits her in England. The ocean crossing gives her time to prepare herself mentally for this new life, though she confesses to Mrs. Jefferson one evening that she sometimes wishes the voyage could continue forever, suspending her between her old life and her uncertain future. The crew works the ship with the same steady competence that crews have shown for centuries. They stand their watches, trim the sails, maintain the vessel, and handle the daily emergencies that arise aboard any ship. A rope that parts and must be spliced, a sail that tears and must be mended, a leak in the deck that must be caulked. Captain Thornton runs a tight ship, and the crew responds with good work. At night, when the passengers are asleep, the watch on deck maintains their vigil. They check the compass, scan the horizon for other ships or dangers, adjust the sails as the wind shifts, and listen to the sounds of the ship, the creak of timbers, the snap of canvas, the gurgle of water along the hull. These sounds tell them how the ship is doing, whether all is well or whether something needs attention. And below, in the mail room, the letters rest in their pouches, swaying gently with the ship's motion, drawing closer to their destinations with each passing hour.